The NFL draft is next week. It is time to lock in, and that means big changes ahead for our veteran players. Some changes could help, some changes could hurt just a little bit, and some changes could be absolutely catastrophic. We are going to talk about the latter, which veterans are at risk of their value potentially plummeting in 2026. The first thing we have to talk about is the Jeremiyah Love risk. All mocks are indicating that Jeremiyah Love's most likely landing spots are the Tennessee Titans or the New York Giants. We talked about this on my live show. Rumors and mock drafts are not 100% accurate, and a lot of times it's just literally wishful thinking. But running back landing spots do tend to be a little bit more sticky than other positions. And the reason for that is that if a running back really does warrant a top 10 pick consideration, for it to get to that point, the talent level is just so extremely high. And even if we think running backs aren't worth top 10 picks, NFL teams clearly do. So this is probably going to happen, and the value dive for both Cam Skattebo and Tony Pollard would be massive. But the value change is not the same for both of these guys. For Cam Skattebo, it is literally a dagger, SOL. He's a handcuff at that point if it happens. But the Giants being interested in Love is more of a talent-based pick rather than an indication that if they miss out on Love, they would draft another running back with their second pick and have that guy be their new lead back. So do not panic, because if the Titans do take Love, it's really a non-issue for Cam Skattebo more than likely. But if the Giants do take Love, Skattebo's value would literally just be in the tank, because the organization, he is tied to the organization for multiple years, and they likely wouldn't be moving on for him. So at that point, he is just a handcuff. Now for Tony Pollard. For Tony Pollard, it is very different, because Pollard was actually a cut candidate, and it is entirely possible that if the Titans draft Love, Pollard doesn't become a backup. He becomes either a trade candidate or a cut candidate. More than likely a cut candidate again. And before you look at me and say, who was trading for Tony Pollard? Literally anybody, a wide variety of teams. You got to remember that it's not the same as fantasy football, where we don't want to trade for certain players. For NFL teams, it is literally just a late pick swap, right? So it could be anybody. But if they can't find a trade partner, he'll just be cut. He is only a $2 million cap hit if he's cut. He's a $9 million cap hit if he remains on the team. So regardless of if it's a trade or a cut, I would not expect for him to move forward with the Titans if they do draft Jeremiyah Love. Tyjae Spears can be the backup. So if Pollard does hit the market, he could still end up being in a place where he would be a viable starter, or at the very least a committee guy. So his outlook is actually much better than Skattebo, because Pollard simply would not be with the team. Quite frankly, from a dynasty perspective, honestly, it would be worth it after Love is drafted. If it's to the Titans, it would be worth it to put in a really super cheap offer on Pollard and see if, hey, you can get him for bottom dollar there, because it is entirely possible that the man ends up with a team like Seattle. Now, Davante Adams was absolutely insane last season. I know it is very hard to let that go, because what we saw before the injury was incredible. He was wide receiver 8 on the season in average fantasy points per game, and that is inclusive of games where he played less than 50% of snaps, but there are potential issues on the horizon. Now, you can say maybe that the injury was not a major issue, but hamstring injuries at his age are often massive red flags. And we know that the Rams were shopping Davante Adams around. Last time they did that with Cooper Kupp, the value for Kupp absolutely tanked. But even if they don't trade him, the problem is they have been linked way too closely to drafting a receiver with their first pick. And the off-the-field issues with Puka Nacua only add to the possibility. If a receiver is drafted even on day 2, because they do, again, they draft very well. It doesn't have to be a first-round receiver. Even if they draft a day 2 guy that they like a lot, Adams' value can potentially immediately take a massive hit. Either he stays on the roster and he starts off strong and then fades as they integrate the new receiver if he suffers another injury, or the Rams at some point trade him into a destitute situation, because if all the rumors from the Cooper Kupp situation are true, that's very clear they have zero intention of letting a receiver go to a good volume situation. So this is not a good situation potentially developing for Davante Adams. I have talked a lot about this one, but it must be reiterated. The Bills' pass catchers are in a genuinely awful spot, and it's potentially going to get even worse because they're heavily linked to drafting a receiver in the first. And here's the thing. You might be thinking, yeah, they're just going to replace Keon Coleman. What's the big deal? It's not going to affect anybody else. Oh, it will. Coleman had 38 receptions on 59 targets. They are not drafting a receiver in the first to give him that level of volume. A new version of Keon Coleman would garner more volume. And the problem with that is the offense is not going to push a ton more volume. The offense is what it is, and it has been that way for years under Joe Brady. That is his offensive vision. It is not changing. Sure, we would likely see an uptick in volume for pass volume for sure, right? But not enough to justify both the addition of DJ Moore and an additional receiver. That is just way too much. One, sure. Both of them, no, too much. For an offense to support both of those additions and be strong from a fantasy perspective, we would have to see an uptick in pass volume to over 600 attempts from Josh Allen. And he's done that before, but once in an outlier year. I would not expect that to become the norm. So if we see an additional receiver in the draft, that is awful for the value of every single pass catcher in this offense. DJ Moore, Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, and obviously Keon Coleman. I love the addition of Mike Evans into this offense to potentially benefit Ricky Pearsall. We saw what the presence of Mike Evans did for Emeka Egbuka last season. He is just clearly such a dominant receiver who demands coverage from the team's best corner. This has been the case for years. Age has not changed that. As long as he is on the field, he is extremely physical, and you cannot take the chance as a defense of not putting your best guy on him, and that benefits whoever is playing opposite of him. Now, is Ricky Pearsall capable of putting up wide receiver one numbers? The jury is still out on that one because technically he has not been on the field long enough to prove it true or false. And if Evans is taking the tough coverage, that would absolutely help. But the 49ers are heavily linked to a new receiver. It's happening, right? It's flat out happening. We don't have to speculate. It's whether or not it happens in the first or on day 2. We're not sure about that, but everything indicates that it will be a solid prospect. Because Ricky Pearsall has not established himself in this offense, it is very possible that whoever they end up drafting simply pushes him out of the way and is the wide receiver one of the future, and then Pearsall's value, unfortunately, plummets to that of just a role player. This draft is extremely critical for Zach Charbonnet. The Seahawks draft extremely well, and they have been on the money with drafting second-round running backs. It stands to reason that they will do it again. Zach Charbonnet is a free agent in 2027, so if they draft someone who they really like, if they draft someone, that could easily be the Seahawks running back of the future. If the Seahawks do not add a running back until day 3, and it seems like they are comfortable with Emmanuel Wilson holding down the fort until Charbonnet is ready, that is the best case scenario. But if Charbonnet unfortunately does have to deal with a new incoming rookie, potentially stealing his spot, that is a major concern, not just for this year, but for long-term value. Charbonnet has not actually been a lead back. At least with Kenneth Walker, he had multiple years of operating as a lead back and then just had that run of showing off how incredibly high his ceiling is. That's why he got that contract. Last year, Charbonnet's usage was fantastic, but it was definitely more of a specific role. Yeah, he had 12 touchdowns. That's fantastic, but it was because he was utilized as a goal line back. He was not a consistent 3-down back throughout the year. He never has been. Now, he's had games where he did operate as a 3-down back, and he was fantastic, but he hasn't done it for a prolonged period of that usage. So no one is going to sign him to a Kenneth Walker type of contract, especially if he is coming off an injury and loses his spot to a rookie. So this draft is extremely critical for his long-term value. And FYI, I have seen multiple dynasty trades with Charbonnet recently, so you can still get very good value out of him right now at a very solid price if you are looking to potentially mitigate risk and get out before the draft happens. Romeo Doubs could be the quickest value rise and fall that we have seen in a receiver. He escaped Green Bay and he got an excellent contract with the Patriots, presumably taking over as the wide receiver one, with the Patriots parting ways with Stephon Diggs. For as underwhelming of a season as it was for Stephon Diggs, he did have a hefty amount of receptions, 85 receptions on 102 targets. He was just rather unproductive with it from a fantasy perspective and only had 4 touchdowns. But the amount of targets is very interesting because Drake May didn't have a massive volume season. He had just 492 attempts. He was primarily working off of efficiency, so there is a lot higher ceiling here for a wide receiver one. And considering that Diggs was 32 coming off of an ACL injury, Romeo Doubs can absolutely make more of this volume, but he might not get the opportunity since the Patriots have been rumored to be the biggest contender for the A.J. Brown trade market, and if nothing comes of that, they might be in the market for a new receiver via the draft. The good news here for Romeo Doubs is that they would have to trade up to get one of the top receivers, and while a true wide receiver one would be great, they have more pressing needs, so they might not go that direction. And they don't exactly have the best track record in terms of drafting wide receivers, so particularly, outside of the first round. So if Romeo Doubs, and also that was in recent years, right? So if Romeo Doubs does make it out of the draft without that first round receiver or without an A.J. Brown trade, he will be fine. But if they grab someone of significance, Doubs would see a dip in value. Honorable mention, Aaron Jones. It's honorable mention because it's very obvious, right? But it's still worth mentioning. One of the most consistent mocks for a day 2 pick is the Vikings taking a running back, but there's only so much that Aaron Jones' value at this point can plummet because we know it's coming. Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason had a very mediocre, and maybe some of that was not their fault, but it was a very mediocre committee last year. They need an actual RB1. While there is a massive gap between Jeremiyah Love and everybody else, there's still potential lead backs in this draft, and Minnesota is likely walking away with one of them. Any residual value for Jordan Mason would be gone, but more importantly, it would essentially be the end of value for Aaron Jones. He is 31 years old as a running back, coming off statistically the worst season of his entire career. Last call on Aaron Jones. And there's a little mild risk. This is not plummeting, guys. Don't panic here. But mild risk, just keep your eye on these guys here because their teams actually do need wide receiver too. So that's fine. Like, there's room for players to be drafted. But they're all potentially taking round 1 receivers. So it is worth noting and paying attention to what type of receivers they draft. Does that player play well off of a receiver that is on the team? Does that player potentially conflict with the receiver that is on the team? Does that receiver potentially garner more targets than the existing receiver? Those guys are Chris Olave, Zay Flowers, and Terry McLaurin. Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. You can find me across all social media platforms at It's Tera Time, so make sure that you are locked in, tune in, subscribe, turn on notifications, and all that good stuff. We are heading into the draft, and then it is off to the races for the 2026 season.